Okay, so picture this. You finally get to that pristine beach, the one you've been dreaming of,
Right.
but something's off.
Oh, no.
Yeah, the air's got this weird smell, and there's more plastic than seashells by the water.
Yikes. Not exactly what you want on vacation.
Not even close.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, is this like a sign? Is the planet trying to tell us something?
It's definitely a message, and it's not just about ruined vacations. The bigger question is who's really listening? And how does all this tie into global politics? The big picture.
Which brings us to today's deep dive.
Yeah.
We're looking at excerpts from a world politics textbook, specifically a chapter on environment and natural resources.
Okay.
And trust me, it's way more interesting than it sounds.
It really is. It's
Yeah.
fascinating how quickly environmental concerns turn into these big geopolitical issues. Like, take the 1992 Earth Summit in Rio. Huge moment. You had 170 states all in one place trying to, wrangle the planet's future.
It's like the whole world had an intervention,
Right, right.
but instead of a person, it's Mother Earth.
Exactly.
But was it really a turning point, though? I mean, we're still dealing with polluted oceans and politicians debating climate change like it's some kind of opinion.
Oh, it was a turning point for sure. Just maybe not the one we hoped for. Rio brought a lot of awareness to environmental problems, but it also exposed this massive gap between the global north, the developed nations,
Right.
and the global south, who are, well, still developing.
The classic "my bad, your problem" situation. Developed countries are worried about pollution and the ozone layer, while developing countries are more focused on, well, actually developing, even if it means things get a little messy.
Exactly. The global south argued, hey, we shouldn't be punished for trying to catch up, especially when the global north got rich by polluting first and asking questions later.
Right.
A good example is the whole ozone debate. Developing countries relied on industries that used ozone-depleting substances.
Right.
Forcing them to completely shut down without any alternatives would tank their economies. It shows how environmental concerns are tied to economic realities, especially for developing nations.
Yeah, you can't really tell someone who's struggling to put food on the table that they should be worried about their carbon footprint.
Exactly.
So how do you even begin to find that middle ground?
Well, that's where the idea of sustainable development comes in. In a perfect world, it's about finding solutions that work for everyone, good for the environment and the economy. But in reality, let's just say it's complicated.
Okay, so sustainable development. Good in theory, tricky in practice.
Yeah.
What are some of those roadblocks? Can you even really have economic growth without hurting the environment?
I think the biggest hurdle is conflicting interests. It's this constant back and forth.
Like a tug of war.
Exactly. Critics say powerful groups often put profit before the planet.
Yeah.
They use sustainable development as a cover for business as usual.
Greenwashing.
Exactly. Like putting a Band-Aid on a huge wound and calling it a day.
Ouch. So if we can't even agree on what sustainable development actually looks like, how do we deal with global issues that need, everyone to cooperate?
That takes us to global commons. Imagine a park, no fences, no one owns it, just wide open space, free for everyone to use. Sounds nice, right?
Until someone leaves trash everywhere or decides to build a bonfire right in the middle of it.
Exactly. That's the issue with global commons like our atmosphere or the oceans. Everyone benefits, but no one wants to be responsible for taking care of them.
It's that saying tragedy of the commons.
Right.
Everyone acting in their own self-interest ends up ruining it for everyone else.
Yeah.
So how do you even govern those types of spaces?
It's a constant negotiation. One success story, though, is the Antarctic Treaty.
Okay.
It designates Antarctica as this scientific preserve, off limits for military action or territorial claims.
So no one country can claim it.
Exactly.
Wow, if it's that hard to agree on something like Antarctica, what hope do we have for even bigger issues like climate change?
And that's where the idea of common but differentiated responsibilities comes in.
Okay.
It acknowledges that we all share the planet, but not everyone's contributed to the problems equally or benefited equally from, well, exploiting it.
So like a global cleanup where some countries take out the trash and others organize the bookshelf?
Kind of. The Kyoto Protocol is a good example. It put strict emission reduction targets on developed countries,
Makes sense.
acknowledging they played a big role in causing the climate crisis. Developing nations, on the other hand, weren't bound by those initial targets.
Right. You can't ask someone who just got their license to start carpooling because there's too much traffic.
Exactly. For instance, India argued that while they're committed to tackling climate change, they shouldn't have the same standards as developed nations who, let's be honest, created the problem. They were still industrializing, and their per capita emissions were way lower.
So basically, every country has a role to play, but those roles might look different based on their past and their current situation.
Exactly.
It's a pretty nuanced way to look at a global problem.
It is. But it also highlights how hard it is to get everyone on the same page. There's always a risk of some countries dodging their responsibilities or using this principle as an excuse to do nothing.
It's a tough balancing act to get right, for sure. But, it's not just on governments to figure this all out.
Right.
This chapter also gets into environmental movements. And I don't just mean the big international ones.
Absolutely. And what's amazing is the sheer variety of environmental movements all over the world, a lot of them working at the grassroots level.
Yeah.
It shows you how much people really care about protecting their own local environments. It's like everyone's got a stake in this planet, so they find their own ways to fight for it.
Yeah.
And the chapter had some powerful examples, like forest movements in the global south trying to protect their ways of life.
Right.
Communities in the Philippines taking on these big mining corporations.
Right.
And then, of course, there are those incredible anti-dam movements in India, like the Narmada Bachao Endolim.
And each of these movements shows a different side of this complicated relationship between people and their environment.
Right.
It's not just about conservation in some abstract way. It's about livelihoods. It's about cultures. It's about basic survival.
And it really struck me how many of these movements, especially in India, are rooted in nonviolence.
Yeah.
It's like they're saying, we're not going to fight hate with hate. We're going to fight for our planet with peace. Exactly. It speaks to the power of peaceful resistance and this deep belief in the interconnectedness of all living things, which is so central to many indigenous cultures.
And speaking of interconnectedness, things get a bit more, shall we say, geopolitical when we start talking about resources, especially things like oil and water.
Absolutely.
And those aren't just environmental concerns anymore. Those are issues that can make or break entire nations.
Exactly. The chapter talks about resource geopolitics, and it boils down to this. Who controls these vital resources, and how does that control affect the global balance of power?
And for, the past century, oil has been the king of resources, let's be honest.
Oh, absolutely. Control over oil equals massive economic and political power in the world. We've seen it over and over again. Conflicts and all kinds of political maneuvering, all revolving around oil reserves. And the chapter specifically mentions West Asia and Central Asia as prime examples.
It's like they say money talks.
Yeah.
Or in this case, oil talks, and sometimes it even shouts.
That's right. And as we shift, hopefully, towards renewable energy, the big question is, how will this resource-driven geopolitical landscape change?
Yeah.
Will we see new power dynamics, or will we just fall back into old habits?
It's like we're entering uncharted territory, in a way.
Yeah.
And speaking of essential resources,
Rare.
we can't forget about water.
Of course.
I mean, it doesn't get more vital than that.
Absolutely. And with climate change messing with weather patterns and making water more scarce in many places, some experts think water wars could become a real threat in the 21st century.
Water wars? That sounds like something out of a dystopian movie.
Yeah, it does sound ominous, right? But there's a historical precedent for this.
Really?
Oh, yeah. The chapter mentions disagreements between Israel, Syria, and Jordan over the Jordan and Yarmouk rivers, for example.
Wow.
These situations show just how crucial it is for countries to figure out how to cooperate and share water, especially as it becomes even more scarce.
It all comes back to the fact that we all share this planet, right? And it's not really an option anymore. We have to learn to share these essential resources.
Yeah.
It's becoming a necessity.
Exactly. And that leads us to the last perspective highlighted in the chapter, one that's often overlooked, the rights and the role of indigenous peoples.
Yeah, the chapter really points out how indigenous communities often have a completely different relationship with the environment compared to more industrialized societies.
Absolutely.
It's not just about conservation for them. It's tied to their culture, their livelihoods, their whole identity.
Exactly. They have this deep, often spiritual connection to their land and a unique understanding of their local ecosystems, built up over generations of living in harmony with nature.
Right.
It's a perspective that's often dismissed as primitive, but it holds valuable lessons for all of us.
Absolutely. The chapter specifically talks about the challenges faced by scheduled tribes in India, who are frequently displaced or negatively impacted by large development projects.
Right.
It's like they're caught between progress and protecting their traditional ways of life.
Exactly. And it's a perfect example of how development, while potentially good, needs to be done with much more sensitivity and respect for the rights and traditions of these communities.
Right.
Their voices need to be heard.
Yeah, it's like a reminder that we can't talk about saving the environment without thinking about the people, too.
Exactly.
It's about being fair, making things right, and making sure everyone has a say in how we build a sustainable future, especially those who haven't had much of a voice before.
Absolutely. It's all connected, how we treat the environment, how we manage resources, social justice, global politics. They're all part of the same really complicated picture.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in, but super important.
It is.
It feels like understanding these connections, even the hidden ones, is like the key to finding solutions that actually work for everyone, not just a select few, right?
I couldn't agree more. And this chapter really gives us a good starting point to understand how complex it all really is.
It does. But I feel like we've just scratched the surface here.
Oh, for
There's
sure.
always so much more to uncover.
Definitely.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's like the one big takeaway you'd want our listeners to walk away with? That one thought-provoking question they can keep mulling over.
Here's something to think about. As the global demand for resources keeps growing, and it will, that's a given, how do we as a global community balance economic development with protecting the environment and the rights of all people, especially the most vulnerable?
That's a question we should all be asking ourselves no matter where we live or what our background is.
Absolutely. Because building a more sustainable and fair future isn't just on the government or big corporations, it's a team effort, a shared responsibility.
Right.
And it takes each of us engaging with these issues, making conscious choices in our own lives.
Like what we buy, how we vote, speaking up for what we believe in. It's a call to action for all of us.
Exactly. It's a call to become informed, engaged, and empowered global citizens who are ready to face these challenges.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder those big questions. Until next time.
Until next time.